Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Um, I thought since it's coming up for lunchtime, um, I was going to do my presentation is going to be more of a conversation than a presentation, so to speak. It's just posing some questions and some thoughts, and it'd be great for us to have that conversation as a collective. So there'd be plenty of opportunities for people to make comments, add things, and I've kept the slides to a minimum, which is unusual for me. So so just to recap who I am, I'm Bret Willers. I'm Head of Sustainability and Climate Change at City of Coventry. Got a long background and history in this area, going in and out of local government, national charities, and even the private sector on one occasion. Um, but my focus over time has really essentially been on sustainability, particularly in the urban context, particularly cities, um, and and I've done a fair bit of campaigning around different issues, but also have been involved in a number of key agenda international level. Um, I was involved in the Urban Environment Expert Group that drafted the European Strategy for Sustainable Cities and Towns. Um, I helped draft the Aalborg Charter with the CLI, which is National Council of Local Environment Initiatives, and is involved in Habitat 2, numerously unsustainable meetings in New York, and then finally in Istanbul is now Habitat 3, which I've not been involved in. But from those experiences, I've seen a transition in terms of thinking around sustainability and how government departments and people respond, and private companies as well. So when I started out as a advanced strategy coordinator for the city of Cardiff before the Rare Earth Summit, if I talked to the private sector, I was most of the time was talking to someone who had responsibility for corporate social responsibility. It was seen as kind of the nice add-on thing that people would talk about, that they felt there was an obligation on their part, but it wasn't core business. Whereas now I'm talking to people at director level and key managers in key core areas of service delivery. It's not seen as some add-on, it's seen as something that's quite central. And similarly, in government, there's been shifts in thinking. And I was involved in what's called a development program to develop indicators for local authorities with local government management board many years ago. And radically, we as a group have put a whole series of indicators which included socioeconomic as well as environmental data. And we were blocked by then the Treasury Department. Department of Environment were acceptable and amenable to it, but the rest of the departments were not. Now, I think we're seeing a change in thinking around when we talk about sustainability, the socioeconomic dimension is being understood more, and it's not just seen as some kind of environmental thing that's on the margins. So I thought there's some shifts. So I'm trying to reflect some of the thoughts and people I'd met over the years and some of the things around sustainability. And I think the important thing about why I put this title, what does a sustainable city look and feel like? Do we really know what that is? And so really, I want that conversation for us to have that conversation around. Most of us live in cities. Cities actually are pretty sustainable when you think about it, because you concentrate resources within an area you reduce the need to travel, etc., etc. You have an economy of scale, so there's some advantages from it. Living in cities from an environmental point of view, they seem like these behemoths that have this massive impact, but actually, would it be worse if we were spread all over the place and living in kind of all live in suburbia? And what makes a great city? And then if it is it sustainable? So we got some amazing cities that are fantastic places to go and visit and live in, or and I've had luck to live in a couple of these cities in the past, but they are quite spectacular. But actually, are they sustainable? And there's the major challenge now is how do we keep those beautiful characteristics that many of these cities have, but actually address the sustainability agenda. And for me, there's examples from all around the world, and I often see that we look mainly to the West and don't necessarily. Oh dear, excuse me. Yes, unsustainable dog barking in the background. If we're to look at examples around the world of where differences are being made, and sometimes there's not the most likely places to look. Some time back, I met my equivalent for the city of Bogota, and I remember him describing to me the problems that they had, and I could envisage what scale of an issue it was. But at the time when I was talking to him, the city of Bogota was growing by 100,000 per annum. So you can imagine how do you accommodate such a population growth, let alone try and be sustainable. The mayor of Bogota has done some very innovative stuff. He's quite a young gentleman, but he's come up with some amazing ideas. And one of them, he got fed up with cars in town, and he decided to declare a car-free day in the city. And it's a very, very radical thing to unilaterally do. But then later on, it went to a public vote, and there was 63% people voted in favour. And ever since, I think the last, I don't know, 17, 18 years, I think now, every year they have this car-free day. The benefit of it was that people could see what an alternative looked like, even if it be for a day. And it gave them an alternative view of their city. And people liked it and liked what they had. So as a consequence, more support for public transport provision, for changing road prioritisation, and the city of Bogota has transformed as a consequence of those kind of actions. And it was just simply by doing something being bold enough to do something just for the day has caused a shift. I had on a smaller scale than my previous job. I was in Eastleigh, and Eastleigh is just north of Southampton, and it's got a really nice centre, a shopping centre, but it's got cars in it. And I kind of said, would it be nice if we just get rid of the cars and talk to the traders to do that for the day? Let's do that for a day just to see people see what the difference would be like. Anyway, we finally got that, and COVID helped along the way in that instance. And as a consequence, I'm told that now there's serious talks around pedestrianising that area, and it will make a big transformation. But people could see what the difference was like. And I think that's one of the things that's really quite difficult to do, to make that initial challenge. The leader in Barking and Dagenham, I think did the Mini Holland programme, had massive opposition to changing road prioritisation, more for pedestrians and bikes than cars. Had a lot of opposition from the local public. I remember talking to him a couple of years ago about it, and he said, but once they did it and people experienced it, people said, why can't I have that in my street? Why can't I do this? So it's something around that, experiencing the difference, and it's a really politically a very difficult thing to do. It's a very brave and bold thing to do, because many population don't necessarily think that way. So how do you do that? It's not an easy thing to do. In Munich, for example, they wanted to introduce street trees, and someone had that brilliant idea. They just literally took a whole load of trees in containers and dropped them on the streets for people to try, see what it was like. What did it feel like? And most of the time where they did that, people liked it and said, oh, actually, yes, I'd like more of like that. And then they went and planned to do something. So sometimes there's things around having that, experiencing something. It's always difficult to know what it would look like until you've actually experienced it. So you have a sense of a feeling of what it would be like, but not necessarily for many people would know. And so that to me is one of the things in the conversations around, if we're looking at sustainable cities, is people getting that feeling what something feels like. The other thing is around looking at, for example, if we're doing green space, often if you talk to planners and others and developers, they'll see, oh, well, I've got to planning constraints. I've got to do this. I've got to provide for active travel. Oh, and I also got to do biodiversity, and and I've got to do this, and like I can't do all those things. I can only do one or few things. Not necessarily thinking about, well, can you integrate all those things? In many cases, like in the city of Curitiba in Brazil, they've seen that actually stormwater management and all that stuff integrates with their development of open space. So they brought the two together. They've seen the value of it in terms of improving air quality. So when we're having those conversations, they're not seen as either ors or trade-offs here and there, but actually there are things that you could integrate with one another and incorporate within your overall design. There's more and more thinking along those lines now, but that is a debate that still needs to be had, and to find examples where people look, for example, at approaches like what's going on at Curitiba and see, can we apply that within our cities? And other things are like having tangible plans so people can feel, well, what it's going to look like. And cycle routes are a classic example of that. It's not just about, one of the biggest issues about putting in cycle routes. If you put them in, will people use them? Well, if you put them in, they cost so many million. So do you invest those millions up front at the risk of them not being used, or do you have the confidence to say, yes, they're going to be used? Or are there other things that you can do along the way? So it was interesting. Quezon City, which is in the Philippines, and recently we gave a presentation to the Philippines cities around electric vehicles in cities, and I was taken by what Quezon City have been doing in terms of their plan for development of cycle routes. Quite ambitious for a city of that nature, and also in terms of what they're doing. But the things that they were doing that were also interesting were things like online, for example, find your perfect bike route, having simple, easy to use guides for people to use, things that encourage people, and so where they could hire bikes and all of that kind of regular information made available. And also they, like what I mentioned earlier, around looking at the integration. So where can we create wildlife corridors? If we're doing a cycle route, can it also be a wildlife corridor? Can we integrate those features? And there's things like that, which that thinking in a broader context is really important. In Cardiff, we had a real advantage of the city that it had two rivers flowing through it, which created green corridors, and which also then created the opportunity to literally cycle from the periphery of the city all the way into the city centre without having to cross too many major roads, and also it's a pleasant environment. Whole load of political issues to address. We had a blind councillor who had real concerns about mixed use, so footpaths and cycle routes combined were not something they particularly liked. But we got around those issues, and as a result, the sort of cycling increased quite dramatically across the city. And combined with that, there was a whole lot of information and two cycle campaigns that worked with us, two campaign groups that actually help to encourage and motivate others to cycle. And other sorts of things you could do, for example, which was done in Eastleigh recently, where we found that mothers, once they had children, tend to stop cycling. And the reason was about confidence of cycling with a toddler. And then also about having the little, the cycle seats for the very young children, and whether it was safe to cycle. So we ran a whole series of courses, training, and sort of fun sort of days for parents of young children. And they were fully booked within the first week. We were amazed at the uptake, and we found that actually we tapped into something that was a real issue. And so it's kind of understanding. It's not just about putting in a nice cycle network. It's about thinking about all the behavioural aspects and other things which we need to address to help encourage use. And Quezon seemed to had got a handle on that. They seem to have a good understanding of that relationship. And going to the fact, when we think about sustainable, when you're in cities like in this place, the Orangi township at Karachi, very difficult to class that as sustainable in terms of how people are living. They're literally living on the margins. So yeah, the energy used to be low, but sanitation was poor, health was incredibly poor. a whole range of issues. I've put this one in here because I had the chance to meet a professor from the university who was involved in this project some time back at the Manchester Global Forum. I invited him over to the Manchester Global Forum to speak at that. And what impressed me about this project was how it mobilized the population that weren't wealthy, weren't rich, didn't have lots of resources, but mobilized them to actually provide sanitation in ultimately for at the end for 100,000 people without any government funding. In fact, the project proceeded on the basis that they didn't want any strings attached funding from any other source. So they managed to mobilize this from within their townships. And they did it by being really planned, really structured planning. And also they manufactured all the goods, all the hardware that went in, all the clay pipes and all of the sanitary ware. So people were employed and generated wealth within. So this is a classic example of early days circular economy, where actually people have mobilized, built a sense of community, and also to the point where they actually prioritize which streets they're going to do first. And people lived with the fact that their street wouldn't be the first one to be done. There'll be another one, and their turn will come. And to me, that was an impressive project. That's now running in 27 towns and cities in Pakistan. And in some respects, it's been a bit of an embarrassment to the government because it's demonstrated what you can do without necessarily having to have that level of control. So for me, this was a very nice example of what people can achieve. Very similar to in Bangladesh, where you had the Grameen Bank, which empowered women and gave them loans and very simple basic funding, which made a tremendous difference to those individuals in terms of their quality of life and what they could do. The other aspect is the devil's in the detail. And I've used Sheffield because Sheffield has got a clobbering you might have seen in the news not too many years, a couple of years back, for felling loads of trees in the city. And it was the authority, I thought, got a lot of unfair flack, because what it was a consequence of a contract that they had for a PFI, which tied their hands, and they were stuck to what the company had done. The PFI, basically the company was saying we wanted to fell these trees, and it was actually really difficult for the authority to stop them from doing so. Now, Sheffield was one of the first. Well, the irony of this was that Sheffield was one of the first cities to actually come up with a wildlife conservation strategy at citywide level. So they actually understood those issues and had a lot of commitment to it. They're now taking a stage further and looking at sustainable urban drainage, sustainable drainage schemes, and they've got some really incredibly brilliant schemes in the city centre, which actually provide drainage, but in a way which is kind of ecologically sensitive, a lot more attractive, and they create features within the city. And it shows what simple things can be done if you get the design right. And this is the key to a lot of things, is around the devil is in the detail. The devil in the detail in terms of even down going to a PFI contract. In that case, they didn't get the detail right. It ended up going wrong for them. But through to a designing of sustainable urban drainage, and in that instance, they did get that right, and they've been very successful. And Peterborough is another area that's been very good at dealing with that as an issue. Another one I think around cities is one of the things that we've been doing in Coventry is that we've got the Regional Energy Systems Operator. It's a nationally funded project. We're looking at how we can develop energy for the city within the city's boundaries. And we're kind of concluding that we could most probably meet about a third of the city's needs within our boundaries, but the rest has to come from outside. And where does that get sourced from, and how do you do it? So interestingly, of course, Morocco is one thing they've got plenty of good abundance of is solar energy, and they're building an incredible solar farm, which is providing the needs for many of the major cities, and Marrakesh is one. But it's just getting a point about, well, if you've got to supply energy needs for the city, how do you do that? Because you put stuff on buildings within the city itself. In the case of Coventry, we don't really have potential for wind, and we don't even have much land anyway. If we did, so we're looking at what those options are. So there's a real challenge there for cities across the world, and that energy is now becoming, and this is an example of a more centralized provision. But also one of the things that we're seeing within cities now is actually a more localized, diverse and diversified provision of energy, coming from not just one company or one utility, but from literally community organizations right through to large utilities. And there's a whole mix of in between. So the meeting our needs is something that's quite interesting in terms of energy needs. They're going to be coming from numerous different sources. And in Coventry, we're looking at solar, passive heat exchange, etc. There's a whole range of different things. Hydrogen's in the mix as well, although that's further down the road, so it would seem. And another aspect, I think, is one of my biggest bugbears is looking at Lego homes, where we get the developers building homes that look just like every other home, and they have their slopey roof, and they're kind of fixed in a period of history, usually kind of Victorian, ranging from Tudor, mock Tudor, through to kind of Victorian kind of period, all things that look like that. And what about all the old industrial buildings and other buildings that we have in our cities, the other bits of character, that why not repurpose their use? And organisations like companies like Urban Splash in Manchester has done that very successfully in converting former industrial buildings into very nice apartments and residential complexes. I had the chance to visit a few in Berlin, and one that really impressed me some time back was one called the Block 101 project, which was former industrial buildings. It was a housing cooperative, and they predominantly Turkish community were living there, and they had set up grey water systems. So you actually had buckets with reed beds in on the sides of the building, with the water flowed down the sides of the building. In between the buildings, there was reed beds, and then that water then circulated around and used. So they actually had different grey water usage and potable water. This was years ago. This was about 15 years ago. This work was being done. Now we're seeing this on a bigger scale, and in Berlin in particular, there's quite a lot of schemes like this. There's an appetite for more communal living and more cooperative approach to living, so in the use of living space. In Britain, we have this very much, our house is our castle sort of thing. We have this very much fenced and gated and separated from. But is that sustainable? Is that really what we would want with a sustainable society and a sustainable city in the future? Or is it more of a communal style of living? So that's really what I was saying, a conversation is over to your comments and thoughts around some of those issues. I noticed I focused more on not so much on the environmental and more on the social and the emotive side of things about living in cities, because I think that is one of the aspects that we really do need to address if we're trying to get environmental initiatives adopted in a broader way. We need to help people emotionally connect with those spaces and value them and understand those kind of connectivities and how we can do that. And that, to me, I think is a real challenge. So it'd be useful to have a conversation as present, anyone's thoughts about what sorts of things we could, that you've seen, places you've been to, or things you've seen, experience that kind of show a way forward. And if you know, yeah, and my model is not just about local authorities doing things, but it's actually, if you notice, the examples I've given have been things around not just authorities, but also communities and things that people can do. There's a lot that can be done it shouldn't just be constrained by, well, was the local authority doing this? There's things that people themselves can do, and there's some very good examples of that around the world.
If anybody would like to type in the chat box or raise their hand, and I'll ask them to unmute.
Yeah. So the raise hand box is just next to the chat option on your tools at the top of the page. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got a hand up from Mike. Mike, would you like to unmute?
Yeah.
Hi. Hi there. Yeah, my Mike's on. I've got
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Brett. How you doing?
Yeah.
My background is in kind of utilities and the regulatory side, so I'm interested to know. And I think what you're describing is great, but there are regulatory and commercial, but barriers that will need to be overcome to have a more integrated, holistic approach. What do you see as the kind of next steps to sorting those out?
Yeah, so that's where RESO is particularly focused on, because it's looking at there's several strands. It's looking at what the opportunities are within the city in terms of what technologies are available, looking at the geography, the topography of the city, the opportunities that exist within it. So, for example, where the opportunities to use heat from sewage, for example. Are there any prime locations where we could do that? Are there, for example, former mine workings in the north of the city? Are those spaces, do they offer potential for passive for heat exchange and looking at heat pumps? So at one end, RESO is looking at the physicality and what you can do with the space. The other dimension is looking at, okay, if we did that, who would invest in it? How investable is it? And how do we have to package that up to secure that investment to do it? And then the third strand, which is getting to where you're coming from, is around the governance. So there is Andy Street at West Midlands Combined Authority, and they were a partner in RESO, particularly interested in this final strand, which is around the governance of energy. So we're moving from a centralized national large energy source, single energy sources are in geographical locations, to this real diverse sources, quite localized. How do we shift the governance? The governance needs to shift to mirror that. And we're arguing the case that needs to get down to a regional level, or even a city level. So Coventry's, in a sense, is kind of developing a model of how that could be achieved at a kind of city region level. And part of that work is around, there's conversations going on at the moment with people like Ofgem and others to look at models of what would that mean for them, and would there be a need for an Ofgem? Would it be something that was done locally and in a different way, and each one adapted to the circumstances of the geography that they were based in? So there is that challenge, and there is that appetite to look at that. So it's funded by Innovate UK. They knew that what we were doing here. So it's not some kind of like subversive act or whatever on our part. It is something where the government generally wants to see, are there other ways of doing this? Because what we currently got is most probably not going to work in the future. So what should it look like in the future? And I think that's really where we are now, is trying to find what that model is and what it would look like. So one of our colleagues on the team has actually been looking at various forms of governance in relation to energy around the world. Things which occur in the United States, which are quite different from here, different sorts of contexts which they operate within, but interesting models nevertheless. So sort of looking at those differences and seeing, well, what would suit our circumstance? So they're doing that piece of work at the moment. And I think it's an interesting challenge. I'm certainly, it excites me actually what they're doing, and as much as it does to look at the physical making things happen on the ground. That is just as important in my view, because it will potentially make it possible for us to replicate this elsewhere as well. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge. Not all these things we can do right now, but then that's always the way, isn't it? We have to keep chipping away and pushing for progress.
So we've had a comment in the chat box from David. Where to start? Open spaces, better for biodiversity, biosecure post-COVID. Green spaces, affordable and sustainable dwellings, reduced unemployment through something like Green New Deal, achieving sustainability whilst also reducing inequalities. He's currently researching inequalities for a new book, looking for inspiration as it's a massive topic. Do you want to reply to that?
So yeah, that's interesting. Well, actually, take the Irangi project, in Pakistan. When I first came across that, it's very funny actually, because I didn't realize it was a connection with a personal friend of mine, because a personal friend of mine is quite a wealthy individual from Pakistan, but he actually, I didn't know this at the time, but he actually helped fund some of the research that went into doing that. But if you took that example of a project, there's something very similar here that which we'd love to do. We have a real problem in the UK with a number of our buildings have solid wall. And to deal with solid walls is really difficult to deal with energy efficiency and retrofit energy efficiency for solid walls buildings. And you have to do external cladding for that. Bit controversial at the moment with all the carrying stuff with Grenfell, but in the Netherlands, there's a program called Energy Sprong, which does this on this 2 scale. And the houses actually they're transformed. They're amazing when you look at them. They appearance wise is better, but also in terms of the energy efficiency is improved quite dramatically. And they've got it where they've got the price down because it's a standard methodology and everything else. In the UK, we've taken that model, trying to deliver it, and it's become very, very costly. And one of the reasons is that there isn't any one set standard, and each time it's done, it's bespoke to an area and it involves a different contractor. Now, one of the things that we've been talking to one of the RSLs around is there an opportunity here for us to employ and train local people to set up a social enterprise which develops this product that then can be used and bought into across the West Midlands. We've got millions coming into the West Midlands to improve retrofit and improve energy efficiency in homes. Is there an opportunity here for us to do that, creating job opportunities and training opportunities for people, and get the unit price down for these products? Because then we'll have a kind of a standardized approach, and we'll have an economy of scale to deliver. We wouldn't have to be dependent upon very high prices that are coming through from various contractors, because they know they should charge those, because there's not many people out there doing this sort of work. Is there an opportunity to do something which actually employs local people and actually makes it more likely that we can do more properties up because we can get the unit price down? And it's things like that. It's that kind of thinking that we need to do. So it's bringing in economic considerations along with environmental, looking at it as an employment opportunity. And there's a lot of that. Coventry's got a very strong handle on that as a city. I'm based within economic development, which is interesting, but it's the right place to be, actually. I often think it's really sensible, because the drivers, the economic drivers, if you can influence the economic drivers and to understand that actually the green agenda is also an economic opportunity, and that the economy needs to transition towards a green economy, then it's about how do you do that. That's the thing. It's not about whether you do it, it's about how you do it. And I think that's a real challenge that we're facing now. I'm thinking my colleagues in economic development in Coventry understand that quite strongly, and actually are really embracing that and trying to make the model work. I don't see that so much in other cities, but Coventry has that entrepreneurial spirit, has done that for many years. It's no accident that Coventry's got the second largest number of patents in the UK. So we got some brilliant universities, we've got some really brilliant minds. We've got people that have adapted to change when the motor industry experienced all the closures of a lot of the car plants. People adapted to that and changed, and still managed to keep employment at high levels by modifying and diversifying. And that's what the green agenda really needs, is people that have those skill sets.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to work on a community energy saving project in Birmingham about 7 years ago, just basically on one estate, 350 properties, and the council and a few local groups, including myself at Eco Centre, went round and yeah, they did solid wall insulation for all the properties in an area, new boilers, solar panels, just the works basically. But because we were all working in one area, as you said, it made it cheaper for them. So I'm surprised that hasn't been carried on across the region at the moment.
And that's it. And that's one of the things that we talked to Midlands Energy Hub and others as well around. Right, how can we need to do this at scale and benefit. We have a social enterprise that's interested, and they would love to locate in Coventry. I'm really keen to see something happen. We're working with one of the RSLs on this one. I can't name them because it's still kind of confidential in that sense. But there's I think it's something that we need to seriously explore a lot more in lots of other areas as well.
Sorry, Bret, can we have a translation for RSL?
Oh, sorry. Yes, registered social landlords, housing
you.
association, and the likes. Yes, sorry.
So I'm going to ask Louisa to unmute and ask her question or input her comments.
Yeah, sorry, I can't see the chat at all. I'm not sure whether I should be able to. I need to know, Bret, where you stand on the gentrification debate, or maybe say there's no debate to be had. I mean, how do you strike a balance between improving city councillors, pushing out the people who might say they've got more right to live there, because anyone has a right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually got direct experience of that in Sunderland. Actually, I was a chief exec of a New Deal for Communities initiative in Sunderland, and we had a couple of areas actually right adjacent to our priority neighbourhoods, and then what was it? I can't remember. It was called Sunnyfield, which was large Georgian houses that had been converted they were basically all the lawyers' offices were there. And we then transformed that back into residential, very sought after residential, very nice properties. And there was a lot of debate about why were we involved in that. And there were several reasons why we had some involvement in it. We didn't use any of our funding or resources that came from elsewhere, but the benefit was that, of course, those houses were having families moving in with children and parents who were largely professionals, who would challenge the local schools because their children would be going to the local primary schools that had a very poor performance record. And one of the things that we noted that the standard at the schools improved quite dramatically as a consequence of the pressure that was brought from the new incoming parents that joined. I'm not one of these. I'm actually for integrating and mixed use developments. The more there is, the better, because people then get the advantages that come with some people who have advantage or have ability to influence or engage with others. And I had a very interesting conversation with a cabinet member, Lord Faulkner, around this particular issue, because we were looking at what do we do with comes with a new deal for communities areas, and what do we do in relationship to what is seen as you're saying, gentrification or improving areas. I think what the trick is trying to marry the two together, so that when you are doing that, that you're finding how do you bring benefits to those neighbouring communities whilst doing it. In this instance, it resulted in improvements to the local schools, physical as well, because we actually we in one of the schools had major refurbishment as a consequence. That was part of the one of six that we got, and the agreements we got out of that, so it actually benefited the local community that way. But it also had the other benefits around bringing in people with other skill sets that actually could be the entrepreneurs and others that could help those communities down the road, and had the resources and connections. And I think that if you can bring communities together in that way, then that helps. I think what we often find within cities is that those communities have become isolated and separated from one another. And you got the worst extreme. And I remember having a real argument with someone from the United States around Los Angeles, who they were talking about, oh, the fire service and this is really good. And I said, yeah, you mean the Beverly Hills Fire Service and the Beverly Hills Police Service? You know, people that live in the Beverly Hills neighborhood get a different, higher quality service than the rest of the city that doesn't actually hasn't got the chance to buy into that. So that's not the model we need. We need something which actually is shared. So I think it's about that. The things about the integration and mixed use developments were quite an important thing. We did have gated communities in the area, which were obviously appalling, and they separated themselves out from others, and didn't really contribute to the communities that they were based in. That's not, to me, a vibrant city. If you've got that sort of thing going on, you need to be seeing a integration with communities and society as a whole, and that has knock-on effects around community safety and all the other issues as well. Because you find when you have gated communities, they actually have to buy in extra security, because they then become vulnerable targets because they're not integrated with the communities that they're with, and then there's a problem. The thing we did in Sunderland didn't do that. It brought them together, so it worked quite well. But it's an example. I agree with you. There is it's something you have to be considerate of, and really, again, the devil's in the detail and the design. I think that's where it comes in again.
I think we've got maybe just enough time for maybe two more questions. So I'll ask one from Adam Tranter. The council is doing some great things on active travel, but it is also widening Junction 7, which will induce demand and bring traffic much more closely to people's front doors. How does the council justify this kind of approach when we've known that building more roads brings more traffic since the 1950s? It seems that we're just kicking the can down the road and using a sticking plaster approach.
Right. If I recall, I think that I'm trying to remember the Junction 7 one, but if it's what I'm thinking, there are some other advantages for doing that, because it opens up areas for other. One, I think, is one around freeing up parking areas for other uses, and I think it also enables ability to put in cycle routes. I think it's going to improve the capacity. I'm not quite sure of the specific development, but if it's the one I'm thinking of, that there is one which actually has got some distinct advantages, because I remember asking the question, why are we doing this? And it was a bit of a bottleneck that caused problems. But by doing what they're doing here, actually improves the scope, and it also will provide. Sorry for the dog in the background. Sorry. The timing of my dog. Also for bus connections. My dog obviously doesn't agree. You there?
He likes walking, or she likes walking.
He doesn't like delivery vans, postmen, and the like.
Sorry, hi Brett, it's Adam. I thought I might just if you don't mind, just follow
Yeah.
up.
I like the cycle food.
So I think as the plans I've seen so far don't actually have a cycle route, and I guess one of the challenges is how do we more broadly stop people driving into the city centre, and by the junction 7 is the spawn end side. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, can. I'm
Yeah,
going to
we
put
can
on
hear you
mute so you don't have the bar.
Cool. Junction 7 is underneath the spawn sort of end side is underneath the arches, which is being widened, and then it will provide the council purchase the car park underneath the ring road. So basically, we're going to have this sort of highway again into the city centre, which to my mind is going to encourage more people to drive into the city centre. And I just guess how that squares with the the concept that we don't want people to be driving, and there is a little bit of a bottleneck there, but the easier we make it, the more people are going to use that junction as their way to drive into the city centre. They don't seem potentially mutually compatible with the good work that you're doing in your area. It seems to be a little bit out of kilter.
Yeah, what we do in the ring road is going to be interesting. So there's going to be some serious rethinking around what happens with the city south development and everything else in the light of COVID and the changes there. So I think it's a kind of watch this space. I think we're very lucky that actually we got a very enlightened director of transportation. Colin is very forward thinking. Pushes me to go further, so which is very unusual for a director of transportation. Is not what I'm used to in the past, I can assure you. So I know Colin has got some ambitions to really try and transform the way we deal with transport across the city. As you know, we've now got the electric bus initiative of ourselves in Oxford. I'll be doing that. It'll be about 300 electric buses. The challenge we've got is post-COVID is about encouraging public transport and shared usage. So the things that you want people to be doing is like shared vehicle use. So in Eastleigh, I had a scheme where we actually had people sharing vehicles. That went out the window with COVID. I mean, they've been sitting in the car park apparently, not being able to be used because obviously people can't share use of vehicle. Strangers use the vehicle. So we've got some of these issues to kind of address. We've got issues around confidence, getting confidence back into public transport. The view as well is that a number of these car parks will most probably be there to provide for electric vehicles, so they won't necessarily be commuter spaces. They're most probably more for people that live within the area that can't access such charging facilities because they're living on terrace streets. So you might find in effect that the opportunity for parking is reduced. But it's to accommodate different form of transport. He's gone. Thank goodness he's gone. I'm trying to get the family to evacuate my dog. Yeah. Sorry.
So I will also just mention for those that aren't aware, Adam Trant is actually our Coventry bicycle mayor. One of the very few. I think. Are we still the only city, Adam, that has one in the UK?
I'm afraid not. Birmingham's got one now. They're catching up. But yeah, lots of good. I should say, I don't want to be too negative. Lots of good stuff happening in Coventry on cycling. But occasionally, you see something that flies in the face of that, and I think Junction 7 might be one of those things.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. Watch the space.
Yeah. And then I think we've got 5 minutes left, Brett. We've got one more comment of social enterprises can combine green energy with retrofitting homes, e.g. by recycling feed-in tariffs to pay for local retrofits. For instance, low carbon hub in Oxford as an example.
Right, that's useful. Yeah, definitely. And as I said before, there's certainly opportunities there. What we need to see is a lightening up of the rules from central government in relation to this, because the funding program that they were running for homes was grossly underspent. And I think there was just too many hoops for people to jump through. It wasn't attractive to people. So if we are going to address seriously climate change, we have to move at a pace in terms of retrofitting homes. It is one of the biggest challenges. And if you look at the West Midlands Combined Authority plan, has just launched the 5-year plan. One of the key focal points is around retrofitting houses and commercial buildings as well, but particularly residential properties across the region, and that is a real challenge. So it's a real opportunity. It's an opportunity for growth of business, opportunity for social enterprise. Yep. But the way in which it's done and how we can deal with that is going to be a challenge.
That's excellent. We might have just about enough time for. We've got 3 minutes left. Anybody got any comments or a question? No. Okay. In that case, I shall draw. Oh, yeah. Mike is typing something.
I'd be interested to know if people thought that was interesting or not. What I tried to do this afternoon was pick something that was that was different from the norm, and that one the examples, but also more about it's kind of some of the thought processes about some of the, rather than we need this type of technology here or that there, focusing more around the kind of the spirit of what it is we're trying to do and how do we mobilize change. I think one of our biggest challenges is how do we inspire people to deal with behavior change. And there's a project that we're currently working with, as you know, David, with Coventry and Warwickshire University, that's picking up on something that Stanford University did in the United States, where it's looking at a design school in Stanford, where they got cross-faculty working with community to look at solutions to difficult problems and to think outside the box. And that's something that we need to do. So that really important question, one of the big challenging questions, how do we encourage people to not drive into work, but to go by bike or by other means? Not easy. There's a whole series of factors that influence people's lives that are preventing them from doing it. It's not because they're unsustainable or don't care about the environment. They just got loads of other pressures to deal with. So how do we address those? What are they, and how do we get around them? How do we make that possible for people? And that's kind of the kind of challenges that we've got to face in the future. And that's only going to be resolved through collective effort. It's not the authority itself can't do it. Individuals themselves can't do it, but collectively, all of us have got answers to those things, and I would suggest it's a whole series of package of things which we need to do to make things possible.
Indeed. I mean, the UK Commission on Climate Change says that 62% of the change will come from behavioural and societal change. And we also need to remember that we've got a lot of control in our own hands. We don't have to wait for the technology, we just need to consume less overall. That will have a massive impact.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to have to wrap up there. And thank you everyone for coming along. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you, Bret.
Thanks, you're welcome. Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.